One of these days I'll figure out how to edit videos, but I just remembered that I probably didn't say what I was wanting to in the previous video there. That, yeah, and if you haven't watched part one, I'll leave a link in the description. But, yeah, so I think potentially the reason that his Trailblazer failed was because of a voltage spike, not only due to the cable being on a spool, and I don't know exactly what the situation was, but I would imagine that he was probably welding pretty close to the truck, and so it had a lot of cable on there, which, you know, a big old spool of cable is going to act like a electromagnet. And then because he has a 12 VS feeder with the contacts, and it would be for the VS and the arc reach, it's got the contacts down in there, so when those contacts break, it's trying to break the entirety of that amperage. Meanwhile, the welder is trying to essentially, you know, keep up with the contacts, if you will, and trying to maintain the current while the contacts are trying to open. This one, or mine here, is the 12 RC, and so the suitcase does not have contacts in it. The weld power input leads directly to um, the block that the gun goes to. So when you pull and release the trigger on the 12 RC suitcase, instead of it closing contacts, the Trailblazer itself actually turns on and off the weld output, and the Trailblazer does not have contacts. It's just the inverter welder turning on and off. And so one would think, I would assume, that having the RC feeder would probably be a little bit easier on the Trailblazer if you're running up at that upper limit of what it can do, which, I mean, you know, granted, okay, you don't want the welder just, you know, farting around all day. You don't want to buy a 500 amp welder and, you know, only do 40 amp TIG welding with it or something, but you know, running it at the upper limit of what it'll do all day probably isn't the greatest for it either. But yeah, just farting around with this dual shield.